Hey guys, today I'm gonna show you how I mix skin tones with watercolors. I'm first gonna do a piece with just my skin tone set, and then after that I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how you can mix the same colors and maybe even more with just red, yellow, and blue. First of all, I'd like to apologize for this one taking so long. I've had to redo one of these pieces completely because I didn't have the palette in the frame, and especially for this video, I feel like it's really important that you guys see how I mix these colors. I am going to be using my new set of Prima watercolors. And then the other watercolor brand that I'm using today is my Sennelier starter kit. I'm only going to be using their ultramarine deep, bright red, and lemon yellow. I've used this before on my last video, so I kind of know what to expect from this brand. But we're starting off with the skin tone set, and I'm doing the swatches right now. The first impressions about the color selections, it doesn't look too promising. It looks like there's a lot of very similar colors on this, and there's also a lot of very light colors, which is I don't think is a good sign for watercolors. But I do get that this palette is not for mixing. It's mostly for convenience, I would say. If you want to really quickly paint skin into your sketches or your paintings, but I really still think there's not enough dark and cool colors to make it even just the best companion set if you want that. But we're starting off with the black because it's the darkest color in the palette, and I want to see what temperature this black is, because if it's a cool tone black, if it has some blue in it, I think it would just save this whole set. Because just by looking at these colors, they all look like there's a lot of warm colors in there. So maybe one of the red browns isn't, and also the pink, but mostly it's all a very warm palette. And now I'm very relieved that that black is cool toned, because then that could neutralize some of these warm colors. Mixing that cool toned black with the yellows on this set I think will make a nice green, which is present in a lot of people's skin tones, so that's great. Also, it would just make this whole palette not look as warm toned, but I still wish there were more cooler toned reds and maybe even something that looks like a purple to this set. But we'll see how it actually feels when we really start to paint with it. So let's just go ahead and do that. First off, I'd like to say that it's so nice not to need to mix so often. You can just go ahead and pick the colors that you need from the palette and go ahead and paint right away. I am really seeing the appeal of skin tone sets in that sense, as that's one big advantage to palettes like this, is the convenience of it all. But I just really wish the color options were better still. Usually I paint over the whole thing so I can work off of the undertones that I've set before that. But even while I do that layer, I still try to shift from one color to the other, so it's not just one color throughout the whole thing. I really love this color redwood on this set. It's so nice and vibrant, and I ended up using it a lot for this painting. And it did also start off very well for this first girl, because even though it's warmer than I wanted it to be, the shift from the neutral brown that I mixed with the black to the yellows, or when I'm going closer to the highlights, is still very pretty. So for the next one, I wanted to add more red to the base colors, and then the one on top to be more neutral by adding the black that I used from the first girl. I'm also very happy with how this next one went. It went exactly as I wanted for this. It's mostly just yellow with the tiniest amount of black to neutralize it, so it's also leaning the slightest amount towards green, which is nice. The fifth one it's kind of a little like the third one, except I added a little bit more red to this, but only the slightest. I used redwood, I think. And then the last one, I got to use the very light pink. It's one of the only cooler colors on the palette, and I think it's really nice. I just wish there wasn't a lot of white in it, so I can mix it with the other colors in the palette still without making the mixture be too opaque. For the next layer, I'm mixing very vibrant reds with one of the more neutral browns. And I'm adding some of that black on the darker areas. I'm just patting it in while the paper is still wet. I really like how these watercolors behave with the water. It spreads out a lot, which not all watercolors do that. And I also really like how the first one turned out. I didn't expect it to look this good. It's not great, but it's better than what I expected. It's really the next few layers after this one that I'm nervous about. But we're moving on to the second one. I don't want it to turn out as dark, but I'm still using a mixture of that by vibrant brown and the more neutral one. Basically the same things as the first one, just with a lot of water. So the third one, I'm leaving a lot blank, so a lot of the paper is still showing. I'm only really painting on the shadowed parts. I don't find myself using so many of the lighter colors. Even on her, she has the lightest complexion out of all of them, because I wanted her to have a more cooler complexion, something that looks a little rosy, but there's not a lot of options for that. And I really could have just used the lighter ones on this palette, but then there wouldn't be a lot of difference between her and the middle upper one. She's also fair, but I wanted her to have a warmer skin tone as well. This next one, I actually wanted a lot of that green, so the shadows look neutral, and just added a lot of water to it so it's not as dark. For this one, I tried mixing light pink with one of the browns for her blush, because I really like the color of that pink. But yeah, this one went better than I expected. The transitions from the vibrant blush into the black that I added on some of the shadows went really well. And then this last one, I just wanted to have a lot of that vibrant orange to complement that base color. After those first few layers, it's really just a matter of building up the values, because there's not a lot of variations in the selection. All I'm gonna be doing is basically using the same colors, because there's also not a lot of black in the palette. And I forgot to mention that after a while it gets really hard to layer these colors because they're quite opaque. But honestly, it's really not that big of a problem, because you're not mixing a lot of these colors anyway. You're just layering them on top of each other to build up different hues. So the only real trouble would be when you're trying to paint darker skin tones, because you really need to get all those values right, and there's not a lot of options for the darker skin tones. It's kind of like painting with gouache. You risk reactivating the layers underneath when you go and add more. This is what happens when there's not a lot of color variety. The people tend to look very similar with just different lightness to them, when in reality there's so much more than that to people's skin. There's different undertones, different color temperatures to the skin, and all of that. So overall, I'm a little bit disappointed in this palette for its color options, because I like the paints itself. I do get that it's for convenience, for when you don't want to mix your own colors, but they knew when they added this black that it was gonna neutralize the rest of the set. So they kind of did expect people will need to mix their own colors anyway. when they added that in there. If you can find another skin tone palette with much better selections and you paint a lot of portraits, I think there's still better options out there for complexion sets, and you should probably get those. But other than that, I would suggest getting red, yellow, and blue of higher end watercolors, so you get an idea of how they work and how they feel. And I'll show you how that works right now. So when I was in school, I was taught that these were the primary colors and that you can mix these three to get every other color out there. But I've done a little bit of research, if you can call watching some YouTube videos about it research. And I found out that these aren't the real primary colors. The real primary colors are yellow, cyan, and magenta. But there's a whole different conversation to it. Today I'm going to talk about these three because these colors are the most readily available for brands, and most starter kits have these. And I think this is okay for me to go with these. I think you can still make almost all of the other colors out there except for cyan and magenta, but those two colors don't show up a lot in painting skin tones anyways. I think for this video it's okay if we just go with the red, yellow, and blue. You know those warm browns that you see in a lot of skin tone sets? Well, it's basically just a mixture of all of these three colors. Because how this works is if you mix these three colors and you get just the right amount of pigment for each three, then you get something like black. So all of those other browns that you see on skin tones really just depend on which of these three colors take a back seat in the mixture. So for example, when you're mixing a warm brown like this one, you still add that blue, but not as much as the yellow and the red. So if you want to go ahead and mix red, brown, it's still the same colors except the red would be the most dominant color in the mixture. And then this one is a more olive toned one. I believe this is what they mean when they say olive toned. The green is the most obvious color in this mixture, so that just means that there's not a lot of red in there. So this really starts to make sense when you remember the color wheel and how the complementary colors, when they're brought together, will make each other muddy. And that's because when you mix those two colors together, that's basically just a mixture of all of three of the primary colors. So a very important tip when mixing skin tones is that when colors look a little too bright, you just add its primary color to bring that color down. So when your mixture looks a little too purple, and you just add some yellow to bring that purple down, and if it's looking a little too orange, you add some blue to kind of neutralize that orange too. And then you can just go ahead and expand from there. So now we're gonna go ahead and paint something with this knowledge in our heads. I'm starting off by mixing a bluish purple as base tone for this darker complexion, because I really don't want this to end up lighter than I intended, which was my problem when I first started painting. I actually don't want to add yellow because that would tone down the purple, and I want to make it really bright and vibrant for this one. So I'm starting off by letting it pool on the darker areas, but eventually I'll be going over the whole subject with this color too. Next one is kind of the same colors, except there's more red than there is blue. And then this one, I want to be more neutral, so I did that by adding yellow to the mixture I already did, and you can already see the difference that yellow made. So on this fourth one, I added a lot more of that yellow, so it's really nice and warm, but it's also not just yellow. There's still the tiniest amount of the other colors in it to bring it down. The fifth one I was most nervous about because I really wanted to try this lighter sort of olive skin tone, and what I did was just add more blue and yellow to the last mixture with just the tiniest amount of red, or else it will end up basically just looking green, and I don't want that. So this last one is just pink because this red is leaning towards the cooler side of red, so this one is just a red and water basically. So now I have this really weird vibrant colors as the base colors, but now we're moving on to the fun parts, and I'm most excited for the first one because I know I'll be using very dark and vibrant colors for her. So basically we're mixing a brown first with all three of the colors, but then I'm adding more red and blue, so it's not just a very desaturated brown. As I'm painting it on her, I'm actually adding even more red to the shadowed parts, and as it gets closer to the highlights, I'm adding more of that yellow. So the midtones on the second layer is actually less saturated than the shadows and the areas closer to the highlights because I want to leave those very nice and vibrant. So for this second one, I'm using orange and green. It's basically the same concept as the first one. The closer I am to the shadows, I'm using more of that green, and I'm adding more of that orangey brown when I'm getting closer to the highlights. I'm also adding more of that dark colors, but just to build up the values on this one because there's not as much contrast on this one as the first one. So for the third one, I'm trying to warm it up a little bit. I'm adding more color to her because the base color is very neutral and I want to brighten her up just a little bit. And then I'm just adding more blue to separate the hair from the face. And then I used more purple for the shadow. On this one, I'm first adding orange for her blush and her lips before I add blue to her shadow, and I'm then doing the same things as before, adding bright colors like this orange just at the edge of the shadow too. And on this one, I'm mixing a bright orange because the layers are very green and I don't want her to end up looking sickly, and that orange is leaning more towards red because red is the complementary color of green, and so that red kind of cancels a lot of that green out from her undertones. But on the edge of my palette, I'm putting blue in there, so when I want to bring down that bright orange, all I have to do would be to take some of that blue and then mix that in there. I'm also still mixing this dark brown for her hair as well, and a few more bright orange spots to brighten her up. This last one is my least favorite because I started off really adding some warm orange in there, and I shouldn't have done that because it made her look too warm when my original goal was a cooler toned pink for her. I think what would have helped is to not add a lot of yellow for the second base and only to have it leaning a little towards purple, so a lot of red and the tiniest amount of blue would have been a better choice for the second layer for her. But yeah, this is how it ended up. And then these last few layers again is just to build up the values. Basically, I'm using just the same colors as the second layer. I'm only adding more of it so I can get the contrasts on their faces right. And this watercolor is so good because it's very subtle and transparent, so you can really go ahead and see and add as many layers as you want and still be able to see all of those layers underneath. And you don't risk deactivating some of those layers underneath, and when you add all of them up, you don't make them opaque like the other one did. Also, you guys, please don't judge these two paintings by their construction and how some of their faces looked like, because I did with the skin tones first, and so I wasn't as careful with the painting as I was on the second one. I really just want the focus of this video to be the colors, so please pay more attention to that. But yeah, this video was really fun. I really hope this helped you guys. I enjoyed it so much. If you have any questions, just go ahead and leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again soon.